Good. So what am I going to talk about? It's a hash function, a new one that we designed. It's called Skyscraper, super fast hash for big primes. So who worked together with me on that, or is still working with me? It's Clemence in the audience, Marcus in the audience, and then Lorenzo, Fabian, Christian, Dmitri, and that's it. Good. So super fast hash for big primes. What do I mean by that? Maybe start right into. So big primes, I mean big in the sense of 254 bits, or a little more. And super fast, I mean nearly as fast as SHA, or as good as SHA-3, or competitive to 64-bit hash functions. In this figure, you see like a comparison for if you wanted to compress, so 2-to-1 compression of around 500 bits. And there are different methods one could say that you could apply. So one idea is to just take some hash function that works over 64 bits, like Poseidon or Monolith, and yeah, then make the state large enough so you get enough bits in there. So you see that here Monolith is pretty fast already there. And yes, if I now wanted to use big prime fields like 254 bits, the situation is a little different. So you can't use this fast monolith thing because it's only defined for 64 bits. So there are other hash functions where you can just plug in the large primes, like Poseidon or Poseidon 2, but they're way slower for large fields, so it's the blue line here. And there's also a hash function which was just designed for big primes. It's reinforced concrete, but it's still pretty slow in comparison to fast ones. So what was our goal now? Our goal was to design a hash function that is fast, like fast in comparison to SHA-3 or SHA, and which works for big primes. And these are our results here. So it's called Skyscraper, and as you can see, for large primes, it's around 100 times faster than using Poseidon with a big prime. Comparing this whole thing in terms of SHA-256, so let's say SHA-256 is the baseline, it's 1 fast. And if we wanted to hash like longer messages, say 500 bits, or even longer messages, like 10K of bits, so 20 times more, then we see that we are comparable to Monolith here, so we are only 2.8 times slower than SHA-256, which is pretty fast. Also for longer messages, we do not scale as good as, for example, Monolith, which works on 64-bit, or Poseidon, but still it's comparable. We also suggest a different setting for which going to longer messages scales better. So now you might have some questions on why we want this, why we use this, why another hash function. We already have so many of them. So first point, why a new hash function? We already have SHA-256. So the point is, and you might know that we need a different sort of hash functions if we want to use it in CK. So we need a hash function that can be represented in an arithmetic circuit. And those hash functions are called arithmetization-oriented or arithmetization-friendly hash functions, or CK-friendly sometimes. Good. So this is the one thing, but there are already a lot of hash functions that are CK-friendly. So why another one? And the answer is simple. We need one for large primes. So there is already one for large primes, but it's not good enough. And there are several CK protocols where we really need large primes. So if you think about protocols that are based on elliptic curve pairings, and they inherently use those big primes, like 254 bits, this BN 254. Hashing over big primes is good. So just some application. I guess most of you know better than I do. I'm more the cryptanalysis person. A very typical application is set membership proofs in Merkle trees, or provable randomness, where you basically have some non-interactive proof, and you have some randomness created, and you want to prove that the derivation of the randomness was done correctly, and many more use cases. So how do we now get to this goal of having a performant hash function over a big field? How do we get there? Also, another thing we thought about was, okay, somehow all those designs that exist already are pretty complicated. So they have, for example, the states, and you have various state sizes, and you need to kind of choose the state size appropriately. Then you have maybe full rounds, partial rounds, and there are many parameters, right? So it's hard to analyze the security of those ciphers or of those permutations. So one idea was, or one goal for us was, make it simple so it's easier to analyze. And the last point we wanted to achieve is just use lookup tables. They're fast. Yeah. But this restricts a little bit where our hash function can be applied, so we need lookup-based proof systems. So how do we get there? First point, forget about SPNs and use Feistel. So I guess you are familiar with SPN construction, so substitution permutation networks. Basically, all the Hades-based designs are a bit like that. So you have some round constant additions, you have some nonlinear substitutions, and then you have some diffusions and matrix multiplication, basically. On the other hand, in the Feistel construction, in the normal Feistel one, you just have two inputs, and you have the Feistel round functions. You apply the round function, add the other branch, and then twist. Here the big advantage is that we are getting rid of the linear layer here, and the linear layer is quite costly if it comes to large state sizes or to many rounds that one might have. So it's good to not have a linear layer. And the good thing about the Feistel is that the diffusion comes by construction with the Feistel. So what round functions do we use then? We have S-boxes, similar to the ones in Monolith, if you know it, but we get to it later. And we use squarings. What is important now is that the squaring over the finite field is not a bijective function, so you can't invert it. But we do not care, because we're using a Feistel construction. And the second thing is that the S-box we're using is also not invertible. Again, we don't care, we use a Feistel. To make the whole thing still a little faster, we're using the Montgomery trick. You might know it from tip 5 already. Yes, so it's basically just a Montgomery multiplication. And the last thing is for the lookup, so for this S-box, it's pretty simple. So we just split the whole state, let's say 256-bit or 254 bits in 8 bits. If it just doesn't fit, we have 2 empty bits at the beginning. Then we do some rearranging. So in particular, it's some circular shift. Then we apply some nonlinear 8-bit S-box, basically, which can be implemented efficiently in hardware, just with some bit shifts. And then we recompose the whole thing. What's important now is for the recomposition, it might be that the result is not in the finite field, but we can just do modulo P, because we don't care about invertibility. Good. So the whole picture is like this. So basically, we have this skyscraper of blocks. That's why the name Skyscraper. We alternate squarings and spar functions. So for the square operation, again, it's 2 consecutive squarings with this non-invertible x square, which has good statistical property, and we speed up via Montgomery. For the bars operation, again, non-invertible, this split or decompose and lookup approach has a high algebraic degree and should thus be pretty good against algebraic attacks. And we speed the whole thing up via efficient operations in the small S-boxes, basically. Good. So now I said in the Feistel construction, we only have 2 inputs. So what if I wanted to use more inputs? What if I want to use it in a sponge? Then I have like RAID 1, capacity 1. Doesn't sound so good. So what can I do? And as I said, we wanted to keep the construction simple, so we don't want to use a larger state. So the idea is maybe you don't think it's simple, but the idea is we switch to the extension fields. So the construction with the Feistel stays just the same, but instead of having field elements as inputs, we use extension field elements. Just a quick reminder, what is an extension field? So if you have fp to the power of n, it's nothing else than a polynomial with n coefficients. So n coefficients in the finite field, fp, and that's an element of the extension field. If you want to add two elements of the extension field, you just do a polynomial addition, and for multiplying, you first do polynomial multiplication, and then you need to do a reduction modulo some irreducible polynomial. And depending on how you choose this polynomial, it might be more efficient in implementation, so there are some thoughts in there as well. Good. Basically, by using those extension fields, one could now say we kind of simulate a larger state. So if we have fp to the power of 2, then instead of having 2 elements for the inputs of the Feistel, we have 4. On the right side, there are just some very quick comparisons for the runtime, so in nanoseconds. So for 1 bar over the normal finite field, we have 8 nanoseconds. And for the bar over fp2, we have 12 nanoseconds. So now here we see, in this case, we operate on 2 elements at the same time. So basically, it's more efficient than having just 2 bars. On the other hand, for the squaring, it looks like as if it was less efficient to work with the extension field. But what's important to mention here is that you cannot just do the squarings and afterwards not mix anything up. So if you have more elements, like a larger state, after the squarings, you would still need to mix it. Then you would need again an MDS matrix, and then you're slower again. So we have some tests done in this direction, but I will spare you with the details there. Good. So for the bar design, for this S-box component, how does this work now? I just use a very simple example, 15-bit, and I want to split in 2 times 8 bits. And if we have the normal finite field, just fp, how does it work? We just split this number. Can you see the cursor? Yes, perfect. So we just split this number into 2 8-bit elements. Then we apply this circular shift, and then we apply the S-box, or this small 8-bit S-box, recompose. So in this case, we see that the result that we get, so just taking this D3 0E, is not a field element anymore because it's larger or equal to P. So we can just do modulo, and then we're in the field again. How does it work for the first extension, so for fp2? Basically the same thing. Now we have our polynomial with the 2 coefficients, and we take the coefficients and do the splits again, so the decompositions in each 8 bits. Then we do the circular shift, and now the important thing is we do the circular shift over the whole state, basically. So we are not only having these nonlinear t's in here, but we also mix parts from the first coefficient with parts of the second coefficients. So it's another mixing done here, another layer of mixing, basically. Then apply the nonlinear t and recompose. So recomposing is, again, the first 2 8 bits go into the first coefficient, and the second 2 times 8 bits go in the second coefficient. In this case, we did not need to do any modular reduction afterwards. And very, very similar for the larger case, so for 3. I think it's not necessary to go through the details, but just you see how the mixing goes in here. So doing this circular shift, basically, this one component has basically inputs from both the orange one and the blue one. Here, the middle ones has inputs from there, basically, and the last 2 ones from those 2. Good. So we talked about plane performance. We talked about how does this thing look like. Why do we do what we do? But what about the proof system now? Is it good? Is it bad? And the answer is it's pretty good. So the thing is that with our construction, we do not need any matrices. So there's already a point where we are getting more efficient for the proof systems. Then another point is that we only have squaring, so we don't need those power maps that might be large, like to the power of 5 or to the power of 7 or whatsoever, such that we have a permutation over the finite field. So we only have squarings there. And for the bar, those are a little more expensive, but we don't have too many lookups there. So overall, we get good results for the comparison. So how do we compare it? For Planckish performance, we compare the area degree product with the native performance in nanoseconds here. And we see that for performance, this axis we already more or less saw. So for performance, we're pretty good. And for proof system size, we are comparable to Poseidon. Yes. Good. So conclusion, we built a new hash function. It's called Skyscraper. It's efficient in plane and in a proof system for large primes. The plane performance is even comparable to SHA-3. What's new is that we use the Feistel design strategy instead of the normal SPN strategy. This strategy allows to use non-invertible components, which was not the case before. We were able, like this, to remove the affine layer and still get good diffusion. And hopefully have a simple design that people keep in mind and don't have to think about too much, like where to adjust what to get what we want. And the last point is the generic bar construction, which is very important because this allows us to fix the construction not only to this BN254, for which we implemented it already, but in general it could be applied to any prime. So we do not need, like in monolith or in reinforced concrete, we do not need a specific prime, and then it only works, the construction only works for this specific prime, but it can be applied to any prime. And due to this construction, the generic bar construction with the decomposition, if you remember, the mixing and the nonlinear S-boxes, we get a high algebraic degree. So this was Skyscraper, super fast hash for big primes. I hope you like it. Yes?
Thank you, Katharina. We have time for a couple of questions. Yes?
So how does the arithmetization look? Because it seemed you had some kind of decomposition of the digits of coefficients, something like this.
Here.
Like those blue and green numbers.
So in the proof system, how we're doing this, yes. So basically, there are different paths we're following right now. So we're not completely done. This one we used here in the comparison is pretty simple, basically, that you have one witness for every chunk here, basically. And then you prove the mappings there. But we're thinking about different ways to do this, but we're still in the process. So.
This might be a stupid one, so I'm sorry.
It's fine.
In advance. Are you thinking about quantum cryptography at all, or quantum threats? Like, it would seem that anyone building a new hash function would have to think about that. Has that been part of your design process, or?
Not necessarily, but since we're typically, so this idea for the design is to work over these super large fields, and the real threat we would have there would actually not be of the breaking mathematics side, but just increase the prime size, basically.
So you're saying it's as secure as current hash functions against a quantum threat?
I would say yes.
Okay. Because every hash function is now kind of thinking about this, right? Like Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's a valid question, yes. Yeah. But I personally think that this should not be a problem in this case because we're working with such large primes.
In that, you said you had to take modulo prime in this step. In the end, doesn't this introduce bias in the output?
We looked at this. So first thing, it definitely reduces the image size. So this is one point. We had different options there. So we also tested, instead of doing modulo, we tested truncations in the most significant part and rotations. And it appears that doing the modulo, the bias is not high. So it's bad for circular shifts in the most significant bit. So there are operations that introduce a high bias. But for this operation, we should be safe.
One more here.
So 2 questions. So how many rounds do you have, and how did you choose the number of rounds?
We have 10. And so basically having like a lower bound on the number of rounds was more from, okay, how many squarings do we need to get like good statistical properties? And then we said, okay, do we already have enough for algebraic security? We did a lot of modeling there. And so currently, at least from the algebraic cryptanalysis perspective, we should have around, I think, 400 bits of security, but we're aiming for 128. But algebraic security is always like a difficult question, depending on the model and depending on the approach. But yeah, so basically for what we're looking at.
10 of both or 10 together? Like
10 overall, so it's 10 Feistel rounds. It's 3 blocks of those double squarings and 2 blocks of those double Bs. So overall, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squarings, and 1, 2, 3, 4 of those large lookups.
And the other question, you mentioned that the S-box is not invertible, which one reason is the modulo, but is it also, it was not clear if the 8-bit S-boxes are also non-invertible.
The 8-bit S-box is invertible. So we are using the same one that they used in Monolith. It's this G S-box, yes.
All right. I think that's all for the questions, right? Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Katharina.